we're connecting our grid, we're connecting our communities, we're connecting our customers. Gives us a lot of visibility. It gives us a lot of flexibility.
Welcome to the Gridmod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
I'm sitting down with Trey Hayes from Southern Company. And this conversation I continue to have because I truly believe the grid gets all the attention, the wires, the substations, the big infrastructure, but none of it moves without its nervous system underneath, the communication background. So Trey is one of our leaders of the AEIC Telecommunications Subcommittee. He's actually our chair. And so I'm very excited to jump in and have a conversation about all things telecom. So welcome, Trey.
Good to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
And so for our listeners, let's give them a little bit of your background. Where are you coming from and who are you and what are you up to?
Sure. So I'm Trey Hayes. I've been with Southern Company for about 18 years now. And so most of that with Alabama. And so have the opportunity to lead what we call a leading as a system team, which is basically a functionalized organization. And so we've got all flavors of the Southern Company triangle with OpCos of Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia Power folks, and SCS and STI and all these other acronyms as well. But basically what we did is, listen to your point, kind of the grid growing at a rapid pace and needs to be connected at a rapid pace. And so having all those minds at Southern together, that's the team I'm fortunate enough to lead. And so it's a ton of fun. I've been able to do that for the last few years. And so engineer by trade, you can see the elephant beside me. I'm a Bama guy, so roll tide to anybody listening as well. But started in distribution, I've bounced around, did marketing and economic development for a little while, and then I came back to power delivery. So, after 18 years, it was time to pick a major.
There you go. Okay, so just to level set our listeners, when you explain to someone outside the industry, maybe like your mom, why do you think that telecommunication matters, and how do you put it? How do you break it down? I like analogies.
It's I think the analogy is similar to relationships that require connectivity and conversation. And so just like you and I are communicating ideas now, it's the same way for the grid. And so there's, to your point earlier, there's a lot of infrastructure out there. There's a lot of wires. There's a lot of transformers. There's a lot of poles. There's, I kind of joke here in Alabama, we've got 96,000 miles of variables every given day. And so, when we've got 96,000 miles of distribution. And so, putting some of that transmission together too. But, that's a lot of variables. And, obviously, like with 4,000 employees, we don't have that many eyeballs. And so having the grid being able to communicate, especially, today when we're recording, it's July the 2nd. It's really hot in Alabama right now. And so understanding how the electrons are moving, what type of generation we need to be bringing up, any issues on the transmission system, those types of things, being able to communicate, and with us, with fiber at the speed of light, is critical. And so I think the analogy is, we're connecting our grid, we're connecting our communities, we're connecting our customers, but having the ability for the grid to be growing at a rapid pace at Southern, and I think, a lot of other utilities right now as well, is building that in a way that it's constantly talking from generation all the way to the meter. Gives us a lot of visibility. It gives us a lot of flexibility. And so that's, I think, going back to the analogy, my wife reminds me that really good relationships require difficult conversations. And so for us, we need to have conversations with the grid on a given basis. And that's what our team facilitates.
And so, thinking about AEIC as a whole, it's been around for 140 years. And one cool thing that I'm doing is really tracking the evolution of when committees are stood up and then when they're dissolved, and how does that conversation continue throughout. And, the fun fact that I've experienced now, I'm into the 60s, so I'm almost, 80 decades, is, it really is not about the particular technology or the transformational time in our history. It's about individuals communicating, lessons learned of a certain transformational time. So I guess I'm teeing this up. You helped stand up the Telecommunications Subcommittee under power delivery in the last year. And so just from your perspective, what has changed right now in our time period? And, what gap do you think bringing the leaders together to have these conversations we're helping to fill?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think humans in general are using, when's the last time you've used less data, right? And so when's the last time, now my refrigerator can talk and all these kind of things. And so, all companies are doing that, right? And so even utilities, like Southern, our internal data consumption has gone up over 3,600% in the last few years. And so for us to have this infrastructure,
Sorry, 3,600%?
3,600% in the last few years. And so for us to be, kind of the controllers of our own destiny in that scenario, we're not buying that connectivity. We built that connectivity and we future proofed it because it's fiber. And so you upgrade the gear on each side so it talks faster. And so, and I think a lot of other utilities are either doing the same or they're enjoying the investments that they've made along the way. And so for the folks, and it's, don't get me wrong, electrons move one way, it's physics. The same thing with photons, with light. But all of our regulatory environments are different, all of our strategies are different. And so that's what's been really fun about the subcommittee is we come from similar environments. We're making, moving, serving energy, but how we're moving data is very different. And so, and there's some folks that it's like, okay, I would love to be able to do this. I don't have a team of 60 people of experts. We don't grow that kind of talent. And so for us to be able to collaborate, and I think we've seen really in a short amount of time, we're much greater than the sum of our parts. And so, and we had a meeting, on Tuesday, and we're learning about spectrum. And so we had an industry expert that's helped us, on some things at Southern, and she came in and just blew the doors off of it. And so, having those types of lessons, but I think it's more critical, back to your question, Liz, is why now is, as, electrons are a premium, in my 18 years at Southern, I don't think we've ever been in the news or, a topic of conversation as much as now. And I think it's similar on the data side is, because everybody is constantly pushing the envelope with AI or with, using something different, being able to do things smarter. And for us to be able to throw a lot of devices at the grid for Alabama, for example, right? So 70% of our state is covered in trees. And so, having the ability.
You're the fifth largest vegetated state.
We are. And so,
look at that fact. I know.
Yeah. And so go back to those 96,000 miles of variables. There's a lot of variables in that too, but being able to throw a lot of devices at the system because we can communicate at the speed of light and really slice up that, that customer experience so that the fewest number of customers are out and we know exactly where to roll that bucket truck, because, people are frustrated when they can't get our product. And that's a really good problem to have. But I think for us, connectivity has brought a lot of results for our customers and for the reliability and resiliency of the grid. But then also, I think for us as an industry, we're able to push that envelope and develop new solutions for our customers as we're building a brand new grid. I mean, we're going to build more in the next 3 to 5 years than we have in the previous 50. And so what an opportunity. And you have the opportunity to build it build it the way that you wish you would have built stuff that's still a legacy system out there today.
And I guess just, for our listeners, when we think, and I've actually had quite a few telecom SMEs come on, because I think grid modernization and the term that we have, qualified and now quantified, and it's evolving in its own state. Words matter. And I guess, when folk think of the electric utility, as I said in my opening statement, lines, wires, poles, big transformers, breakers, but like what you're spelling out is fundamentally for all of that to be able to perform to the reliability that we all expect. You have to have this whole other infrastructure. And with that infrastructure requires like multi-faceted SMEs that understand not just how electrons flow, but like you said, photons flow and then how they all talk together. So like in this room of the subcommittee, we have diverse perspectives. Like you mentioned fiber, and then there's this other spectrum. So I guess when the members get together, you're coming from different regulatory environments, different ownership levels, really different fundamental infrastructure that's already there, and then you have different aspirations. But like what are the other, like, I guess, themes that are within telecom per se?
Even for, we've got a lot of wireless capabilities with our AMI network and our SCADA networks and those types of things, but it rides eventually a fiber network. And not everybody has that capability or that's their investment strategy.
Or connects that dot.
Exactly. And so there's, kind of for me, I'm not smart. I'm very coachable. So there's Fiber for Dummies is in this bookshelf behind me. And so, but you have to start somewhere. And so there's a lot of wires in the wireless business. There's a lot of wires in the satellite business. And so, but, kind of looking our hand over, I think for all of the different companies, I think we started really from a strategy standpoint. We started having those conversations about, what's our strategy? What's AEP strategy? What's ComEd strategy? And then what are the ways in which, what's success look like? What are you trying to accomplish? And then us putting our heads together to say, okay, I've solved that problem with this technology. And somebody else may say, well, I've solved it with this. And so you look at what's the best investment for the customer. What's the best way to stretch that capital dollar? What's the best way to offset those O&M costs? Because you've got options, because this technology has evolved just like moving electricity has evolved, And so I think for us, and then having a collaborative group, like, we started with the strategies component. I think the next was like a labor strategy, right? It's like, okay, who are in-house folks, who are contractors, who are covered labor, who are not covered labor. And it was across the board. And everybody had their reason, but there are a few companies that are just like, hey, I'm getting started. If you were me 10 years ago, how would you start this? And so you've got all of these gamuts of these conversations. And for me, like, it's a ton of fun, because we're, leaning on one another, and it's a safe space, like we shared kind of it wasn't a safety moment, it was a performance moment. And so we shared that with the group, but just like, here's how, not to do this. And so, like, because I don't want anybody else to make, some similar mistake that we did. And so, but I also, I think for all of us, that are at those tables and on the similar calls, is we want to make the best investment for the customer. I think in a time where, again, utilities are in the news and sometimes not in, a glamorous light. I made this statement when we were at the summit. I was sitting by somebody. I said, I wish the public could be in this room and see how collaborative this industry is, and to see how much we talk about customers and we don't talk about profits and all these other things. We talk about customers and customer experience, and how do we serve? You hear customers over and over and over again. And I think for the subcommittee, even though it's relatively new, that's been the forefront from day one, is how do we best serve our customers? How do we best, connect the grid so that we can do so? And then what's the best investment? What kind of problem are you trying to solve? Who else has solved that problem before? And how do you leverage that?
I love it. And I guess going back to the historical archives, the original thought leader behind what became AEIC he was in charge of running a plant in Maryland, and he was given the honor to also be in charge of running some plants in PA across the border. And so after his experience of a year or two observing the failures that were occurring across the 5 different plants, he noticed how differently the approaches were, but the same failure mode. So he wrote a letter in 1885 to all folk that he knew procured this set of equipment, and asked them to come into a room and talk about, really not the successes, really the challenges and the failures, seeing that the failures were the same, but the approaches were different. And is there a best practice or a guideline to it? And I think, like what you just said, the public to observe, is if they truly leaned in and tried to unravel the complexity of this massive machine that we've all, collectively have built. You do see at the core of it is to serve the customer, especially those that really want to understand the technology or the phenomena of why, there is an obstacle. And like I like to say, or actually it's a quote from one of the Stoics, right? Obstacles do not block the path. They are the path.
That's right.
And so I think, just listening to you, there was like multiple facets. Like, you have the fiber expertise, you have the wireless expertise, you have the acknowledgement that even with wireless, there's wires to be understood. You have to understand the resiliency of it, what the required redundancy of it, what the standards are, how they all interoperate together. And then I guess you also mentioned like the workforce readiness, which is a big conversation in almost every subcommittee that we're having right now. And so I guess out of all of that, and just to tee you up on a story, like what topic is surprising you, or what are you, think that that we're leaning harder into, I guess, than you didn't realize maybe 2 or 3 years ago that you're in this space now?
Yeah. I think really across the board, kind of, I don't know if I've ever seen us as an industry collaborate as much on something as we have large load. like we do storms. We talk a lot about storms and how we get those lights back on, and we roll trucks all across the nation. And I mean, and it takes a lot of coordination and a lot of really smart people, to pull that off.
Just to annotate that, I mean, there's not many industries that share resources like we do to ultimately, after some type of storm, mutual assistance is a very kind of awesome best practice that I don't think gives enough like highlight to like the reality of it. So,
and I mean, I think, back to really, almost a couple of years ago now with Georgia Power's response to Helene, a lot of my team and I were outside of Augusta, and I worked a lot of them. It was one of the worst I've ever seen, but Georgia did a phenomenal job of not only getting the resources in, and the industry responded in a big way, but, I think Georgia did a phenomenal job of communicating to the customers. It was every night, everybody wants their tallies of how many poles we got up or how many transformers, how many lights we got on, but they were literally using that to communicate very transparently with their customers. Here's where we're at. Here's where here's the progress that we're making. And so I think they were, it gave customers a lot of hope. And so, and I think, as the industry, I think we're doing similar approach or similar collaboration, very different circumstances when you start talking about data centers and large load. But the conversation of, we can do hard things. We build infrastructure. This is an infrastructure problem. That's what we do. That's what we've done for 100 years. How do we figure this out? And so I think that's really exciting because, I guess my kind of crazy, like, we're living history right now. This is what we're doing as an industry will be, talked about, written about for the next 100 years. And so, you're talking about the archives with AEIC, like our archive downstairs, you've got the William Patrick Lay, Alabama Power Company is developed for the service of Alabama. And so this is another chapter in that book and so, I mean, it sounds dramatic and I get it, but I truly believe it. And I think building on the momentum that we have as an industry, we have conversations. To your point, there's not another industry on the planet that supports one another in times of need like we do. And so building on that trust, building on that collaboration, I think is how we solve this problem. And it's not really a problem as much as it is an opportunity. Is we build stuff, we move electrons. Now, these are really built big stuff and big electrons, but it's what we do. It seemed big during rural electrification too. And so, but here we are.
Yeah. And I think, a big part of being able to build and to deliver is to truly believe and understand what's being asked and what is going to show up as a customer. And I think that's the big complexity that we don't speak to enough is communication and the transparency of what's real and what's not real. And then how do you plan? And then if it is real, like, let's go. But like, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on all parties to really make those cues, truthful. And I do agree, like the utilities have, and, you're making me quote D-Knock, but it's a gentleman that stood up global Visa, with a very regulated, competitive industry, the banking industry, a space of, what do you call it? The chaotic age, chaos and order.
Yep.
But within that system is a platform for collaboration. And like, you're right, like utilities are sitting and they're ripe, and AIC is proof of that collaboration on a continuous basis. And so when, going back to the telecom space, data centers, I mean, right? I don't think that now that we bring them up, which, I actually try to deter that topic because everyone else is talking about it, but there's a point here. Is, a big part of building these centers is then be able to communicate that data out. So like, how does that kind of interlock or integrate with the telecom necessities of the actual grid's performance, let alone the needs to like communicate? There's a massive amount of data transformation that we're having. Is there coordination there, or do you see that like something of a part of the strategy to be aware of?
It is, a big portion for us. So we've already executed with one hyperscaler in the Southeast, and we've inked dry on the second one, and both of them are, going as, they're growing, and it's very analogous to the electron side is the photon side. They need a lot of electricity. They need to process a lot of data, and they need to move a lot of data. And so we were fortunate of, kind of the vision that, folks like Scott Moore at Alabama had years ago. And we started putting long haul fiber on our transmission lines and, on those right of ways. And same thing in Georgia and Mississippi. And and while we had the ditch open, we were like, let's throw some extra conduit in there just in case. Well, now it's just in case. And but it's different for the hyperscalers because that's a very competitive market, obviously. And so we're a different solution provider than what they have in traditional industry with what it takes to connect those data centers to one another, but what it takes to take those data centers to a colo facility and get it really across North America and across the pond as well. And so, but we've been able to do that because it's an infrastructure problem. We were advised like, hey, if you want to get into this market, you need to be good at three things. You need to be good at construction. You need to be good at customer service. You need to be good at outage response. I was like, okay, like that seems like
a utility.
Seems like we could do. And so, but it's a very different customer and a very different timeline. And so, and it's once the negotiations are done with the power side, then it's a different set of people that we work with. And for us, I mean, it was a great learning opportunity because it was a real contract and a real deadline and testing and splicing and turning things over. I mean, it needed to be next to perfect and done in 9 months. And so we're able to do that. But I think the value that we've been able to bring is a couple of things. Is because our cable and our fiber is adjacent to that conduit. If something happens, if it gets cut, then the nuclear plant can't talk to the operations center. And that's not a great day for us. And so we're going to have a utility grade network, but a utility grade response on any type of cut or outage, the same way we do with electricity. And so, and then also because our fiber is located on our transmission right of ways, that's a path that they can't get in the market because those right of ways are there for blood, sweat, and tears in 100 years and those types of things. And so, but the kind of the other solution providers in that market, they're typically on a DOT right of way, maybe a railroad right of way, those types of things. And so when they're looking at their resiliency and their redundancy for their connectivity, we offer a different solution. And we offer a utility grade network. We kind of, with our partners at Southern Telecom, it's our mission is to build the first utility grade network from glass to air. And I think that's what we're doing. But it's an interesting conversation. I think on the power side, it's an interesting conversation on the connectivity side because these are massive companies, and so it's a different conversation.
And really just for our listeners, what you're sharing is, the telecom system ultimately was becoming a reality just as well as the electrical utility system. And, there's great history in, those companies that, ran our phone lines versus ran our electrical wires. And, through the history, spaces have diverged. They were separate. Some continued to own. And so what you're speaking of is the strategy that was chosen to really have not only electric utility provider, like you provide the electrons, you've spun off and have another service to provide customers, which is electrons and photons.
That's right.
Which gives you that opportunity to really deliver this network that you speak of. Whereas, there are other utilities across the nation that fundamentally that wasn't the decision, nor was maybe even allowed. I don't know, it becomes down. But you ultimately have that collaboration, though, to speak to your own assets as well as understand the phenomena of speaking and providing and driving for others. And so that just brings a whole layer of complexity, Trey. Which,
that's not. I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you, but that we didn't start with that goal in mind.
Right, like it became a reality
for connectivity to the grid, for the 3,600% growth, but we've been very collaborative with our regulators in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi as well, of being very transparent about, hey, this is what we've got out there. And then if we have capacity, as we're looking at digital divides in the Southeast, which are tremendous, if we have excess capacity, can we lease that? And then the customers get the upside of that as well. And so I'm not smart enough to make it more complicated. It's an Airbnb business. If we've got an extra bedroom,
right,
our regulators have allowed us to lease that out. And then that revenue goes straight to the rate base. And so we're hoping our the goal is to put as much of a downward pressure on that investment as humanly possible. And so
as an example, I was just trying to share is like, of all systems, complex systems in a chaotic world, is this ebbing and flowing, and the realization that creative thought and out of the box thinking can lead to opportunities that have yet to be determined. So giving that flexibility and that ownership to those that like have proven the ability to deliver when outages occur in a rapid phase, have a high reliability, and be able to build infrastructure, other positives can spin from it. So that was just what I was trying to like relay into the idea that you guys weren't starting there, but like now you're in this reality. Okay, just like, I guess for a utility thinking, you're wrestling with exactly this, or I would like to learn more. How do they plug in to the AEIC subcommittee effort?
Like most great things in life, you can go to the website and find us that way, or reach out to, Liz has done a phenomenal job. I'll give Jimmy a lot of credit too of helping us, put our name out there. But there's always an open seat, and we're open to multiple folks from companies like I think one of our members. There's 3 or 4 members, from that utility.
Because you need like the cyber perspective, the IT perspective, the OT's perspective, and really the operation reality. So like there are room for all of that SME type of discussion, right?
And then as we've done, kind of our virtual meetings, we offer those up of just like, hey, if this is a topic that somebody's not on our committee, but somebody in your company that really needs to hear about, spectrum availability, then wear it out, hit the forward button, because we want to learn as rapidly as we can. And so, but yes, there's plenty of room for anyone listening or interested, and you can find us on the AEIC website and our subcommittee.
And I just have to share my friend Stacy from TECO. Sharing is caring. So, if you really, I think the whole vibe of the subcommittee is the knowledge of one is the knowledge of all. And so we're all dealing with these issues at the same time. This particular subcommittee is in this very broad, also topic area, where you're going to find like-minded and peered folk.
Absolutely.
So also, Trey, the last question I'm going to give you is like thinking about your journey in this space. You've been in the industry for 18 years. For anyone that's kind of sitting and wondering how they can be a part of the solution with all of these multiple opportunities, not challenges, what's advice that you can give to those that are listening to traverse this time?
Yeah, I think for me, like it really goes back to African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And if I've learned anything in this industry is you don't get anywhere by yourself. I mean, collaboration is very, very important. Whether you're, I go back to my first job here as a distribution engineer. It didn't matter how pretty that print was if the crew didn't understand it and the crew didn't build it, And I think going back, for us is, our team is very quick and very talented, and and we go at a pace and we fail at a pace that, is really encouraged, because if we're not failing, we're not, pushing the envelope. And I want us to continue to lead. And so, don't get me wrong, there are things in our industry that you don't get a second chance with. I mean, safety's safety, and rightfully so. But for us, I think we're in a space, where this playbook that we've ran for the first 100 years is not the playbook anymore. And so this time of a dynamic industry, and I think us being able to reap the benefits of really, kind of the seeds that our predecessors have planted. Yes, this is a space, AEIC is a space where you can really talk, and you really have industry peers that care, and so leaning into that and understanding is, kind of, that's how you really get there is, I guess the last thing I would say is what I've learned over time, and especially like, with working with AEIC and our subcommittee is really when I'm approached with an opportunity or a challenge, I don't ask myself, well, how do I fix this? I ask myself, like, who can help me fix this? And so, and I think acknowledging that makes you a better leader and not less intelligent. There's going to be some times where you know the answer. There's going to be most of the time where you know the question more than the answer, and becoming okay with that. And, I typically surround myself with people that are much smarter than me, which is not hard to do, but no, and being comfortable with that, and being comfortable asking the questions and understanding that you're never going to have all the answers.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, Trey Hayes from Southern Company, thank you for showing up and contributing to the subcommittee, and I look forward to seeing you in Alabama in the fall during the in-person meeting. And if you're a utility listening in, come find the Telecommunications Subcommittee. There's a lot of awesome conversation happening in a peer network that is building. So until next time, thanks.